Welcome everybody to our second online session. We're here with Dr. Terry Lewis from Oregon, and we're so excited to have her back. I'm going to turn on my video. She's going to be talking about Tier 1 and giving us a brief overview about that. Then we're going to break out into breakout sessions. So the first thing we're going to do is start with our 3 minutes of quiet time. So this is, again, your time to recenter and relax. You can choose to do whatever you would like to that would help you connect to this group and this content. So for example, if you want to write in your journal and do some reflection or doodle, that would be awesome, or stand up and stretch, or just sit there in silence and breathe, or think about your goals, whatever you want. This is your quiet time. So
Alrighty, here we go.
just wanted to remind everyone again to take a moment to be in the optimal state for learning. And like Uncle Kanoa taught us about being in Hakalau and seeing the ceiling above and the walls to each side at the same time. So big picture perspective. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Terry.
Well, hello. I am so glad to be back. I'm out visiting schools and just so impressed with all the passion and the wonderful work that I've been seeing out in the schools. And so glad to be back working with H-PEP again. And today I wanted to focus a little bit more on just that foundation piece, the how do we really build that positive climate that will allow us then to support students and families who need a little bit of support, and then the ones who need a lot of support. And so one of the things we really try to talk about when we talk about PBIS is how it's different from traditional disciplines. And in traditional disciplines, we tend to focus on what the student did, what the problem behavior was. And then we use strategies that are intended to say, don't do that behavior again. We're going to stop that problem behavior. And so it really puts us in this sort of perspective of right in that moment. And it's like, what do we do when the problem behavior happens? PBIS says, okay, we know that students are going to make errors, but we're going to address those by giving students new skills, new ways to meet their need. And we're going to do a lot of stuff about changing environments, so environments are very supportive of the students' behavior so that they're more successful. We're also going to make sure that we're matching instruction to the students' needs, and that when we're taking a behavioral approach, we're going to take an instructional approach as well. So we're going to teach appropriate skills, and we're going to acknowledge or reinforce those appropriate skills. And we're going to focus on something called function-based, which we talked a little bit about yesterday, which just says we know that students, or all of us, that when we have a behavior, a problem behavior, that a lot of times it's because we have a need and we don't really have any other way to meet our need. So we're going to focus on what that function is. What I like about PBIS is it moves us from thinking about what do we do when the problem happens to what do we do in between. How do we prevent? What are those things that we are doing when students are being successful? So we're going to take this sort of take a slant off the traditional approach and focus on the more positive. One of the things we do know is that really about 80-90% of our students do well just because they're pretty happy, healthy, and they've got some social skills. And we know that about 10 to 15% will need a little bit of support, and that really only a small percent of students do we get very concerned about and who need a lot of support. However, if we look at our time as the adults to support those students, it takes much less of our minutes to support those 80% and takes a lot of time to support those 1 to 5%. So even though it's a small percentage of students, they require a lot of staff time, a lot of resources to be successful. So PBIS is sort of a system or a framework, and a lot of it is supporting staff so they then are able to support the students who need it the most. One of the things we do when we start building that foundation is say, well, let's reach some common agreements. Let's talk about what are our common values. And so we look to identify about 3 to 5 of these expectations or values. And these are things that focus on those desired behaviors. What do we want them to do instead of the problem behavior? They should be pretty easy to remember. So we talk about them being short and being really positive. We also say it's really important to consider the culture of the community. So if you have values that are a part of your culture already, those are great ones to say, let's just build PBIS off that already existing sort of foundation. But one of the things we know is if it's really going to be, the whole school community, the whole climate, it has to be ones that are relevant and meaningful for all students, all staff, all parents, and anyone else who comes to our school. So we want these pretty broad kinds of values. So here's one from a middle school. They have be responsible, respect yourself, respect others. We have, I think, another example coming up. Here's one of my favorites. This is from a school in very northern North Dakota, and they are about 98% Chippewa. And so they did this awesome way of bringing the Chippewa culture into their Dragon Way, which is their high school mascot. And it's hard to see. The young man's holding a poster. They had a student contest, and he won the contest for designing what their logo was going to be. And it's hard to see in this little picture, but the green part is actually the shell of a turtle because they live by Turtle Mountain. And the feet on the turtle are colored the colors of the medicine wheel. Again, sort of a nod to their Native American heritage. And then the banner that's going around, sort of the flame banner going around out of the dragon's mouth, says worth, honor, and I want to think of going from memory, success, which are 3 of the Chippewa values. So they did an excellent job of sort of saying, how can we honor our community? How can we honor geographically where we live? And how can we provide students a voice so that they can be participating in the development of these values? Well, now once we have those values, right? We need to go beyond just saying them. We need to really make sure that we acknowledge students when we see them. So again, yesterday we talked about it's all about relationships. And so we're going to use PBIS to build those positive person-to-person relationships. And we know, and we say this all the time, we want to strive for more positives to negatives. But that's one of those things really easy to do, but sometimes hard to, or easy to say, but hard to actually do. So we want to look for about 6 to 8 positive interactions for every 1 negative. And part of that is, yes, when we think of talking about how we as the adults interact with our students, but it's also the same thing for those parents. So we want to make sure that instead of just saying, oh, do you know what your child did today, that some of those things are what your child did today are super positive. So they hear from us 6 to 8 positives for every sort of negative kind of feedback that we need to give them. And we want to be pretty specific. So instead of just saying, great job, we want to say, wow, I really liked how you listened, and took this other person's perspective. That was being really respectful. So we're going to help them learn what we mean by those large values. The study that they did, this is this awesome study that Buhlman and Gottman did, and they were looking at this positive kind of interaction with adults. And so they looked at 700 newlywed couples, and they just watched them for 15 minutes, just let them interact. And they were able to predict with almost 94% accuracy which of those couples would still be married 10 years later. And what it came down to was that ratio of positives to negatives, which is, again, even though we're sitting here as educators and we're thinking about our students, we are also as influenced by the environments that we're in, whether they are positive or negative. They impact us as well as students. But then we also have to, like I said, we have to acknowledge them. So how are we going to acknowledge students? And again, a big part of PBIS is that systems piece. So it's in addition to acknowledging students, what kinds of things are we going to do to remind staff to be super positive, to get those ratios up of 6 to 8 positives to 1 sort of negative? So we want to come up with something that's going to be used at a really high rate, very high frequency. We also want to stay in our head that we're not just building a climate for our students, and we need to focus on how are we going to acknowledge the staff as well, because we're going to ask the adults in the school to make some changes to how they're interacting, how they're thinking. A lot of times when we talk about reinforcement, people always think we're talking about M&Ms or they're talking about a token, right? We absolutely can have something tangible, right, like a token that they can cash in at the school store or that they can use in their classroom for a treasure box, right? We can use tangibles, but there are so many ways to acknowledge other than things, right? So there's social. There's lunch with friends or lunch with a favorite teacher. I know my daughter's was lunch with the librarian. There's activities, dances, assemblies, picnics, social events, again, which pair sort of an activity with the social. And then there's tons of sensory. Like we started today with 3 minutes of quiet time with some music in the background where we could sort of focus on our own sort of sensation. So there's so many ways that we can acknowledge beyond just sort of things. So we're going to say, how can we make sure we set this up in a way to prompt staff? So a lot of our schools will rely on some sort of a token, right, or a caught you being good slip. So here's one from a middle school, and there's 3 expectations, and which expectation the student met, and it has the student's name, and it has the teacher's name as well. So now we can, as we acknowledge this student, we can also say, and thank you for Mrs. Friend for identifying, Jessica being responsible, in our school. Here's one from that high school in North Dakota that brought in the student competition. They actually took theirs and they made it pretty small, about the size of a cell phone. So it's really easy for staff. A lot of them, they put them on their lanyards or they can put them in their pockets so they're right there all the time as that reminder. And they can check where did the behavior happen, what was not only just their expectation, take care of yourself, others, or the environment, but specifically what they were doing. And then I like on the left-hand side on the gold one, it shows the steps. Name the behavior and the expectation, fill out the slip, pair it with that positive acknowledgement, give the slip to the student, and then remind them to turn it in the homeroom. The other thing they did is on the purple side, they said, because we're going to talk about that in just a second, we know students are going to make errors. So some of those errors are little errors, minor behaviors. I'm late, so I'm running in the hallway instead of walking. Right, so again, simple, like what was the location, what rule was violated, what was the specific behavior, and again, the steps written out for the staff. The one thing I really loved about this high school is that they took these, and it was like this double-sided pad. They made the pad have 4 times as many golds as purple. So it kind of, as the teacher was going through their week or going through their day, they had this visual, quick sort of pulse on how many golds they had given out versus how many purple. And if they had a whole bunch of golds and no purple, they could go, oh, I'm being kind of cranky today. I need to change my perspective. So I really liked how they did the written prompt, the physical prompt, and then the sort of color visual kind of prompt as well to help staff remember to focus on the positives, which is hard to do because we're so busy during the day trying to get all the other million things we have to get done during our work day. They also then said, okay, once a month they would draw one of those I Spy slips, or they would draw a couple of them every month for a bigger drawing. They went out into the community and they said, will you, all the local stores that were in this town, this small sort of town, would you honor this coupon for a kid for $5? So now if a student got their name drawn, they got this $5 coupon, and then they got to kind of say, do I want to go to Margaret's Beauty Salon? Do I want to go to the Peace Garden Pharmacy? Or maybe I want to go to the hardware store. So they got to pick and choose. The other thing they did that is sort of pulling in the community is they got all of these stores to post the Dragon Way expectations, those values that were Chippewa, and they also got the town to paint them on all the garbage cans. So they went and said, not only these are our school values, but these are our community values as well. So I love, like I said, I loved sort of them bringing that in, the whole community and the student voice. A lot of times we get asked, well, aren't rewards dangerous, right? If we acknowledge, if we use external reinforcement, right, that means that kids won't develop that intrinsic motivation. Well, we know that if we use reinforcement well, if we use acknowledgement well, it actually fosters learning. It actually supports learning. We also know if we look at the research, if you're good at something, right, so I love to read, right, I'm an avid reader, and I will curl up with a book anytime I can. Well, I'm intrinsically motivated, intrinsically reinforced by reading. But if my mom says to me, oh my gosh, Sherry, you're such a good reader, right? I might say, okay, Mom, I'm 50, it's a little awkward, right? You know, I might think that's a little funny, but it's not going to change the value I already have in reading because I'm already getting it. So what we've learned from the research is if you're super good at something, reinforcement isn't necessary, but it's still kind of nice. But if I'm trying to learn to do something that's really hard for me and it's frustrating and I'm not accessing that intrinsic reinforcement, that's really where extrinsic reinforcement is critical. It can keep me going. It can help me to persevere. It can get me to keep trying the hard thing, you know, until it sort of becomes easier for me. So we know that they're not dangerous, right? We know that they're actually very instructional, especially if we're using them to build those relationships and we're sort of really focused on how we're using them. Like I said, you know, earlier when I was talking about the I Spy slips, we know that students are going to make errors. We're going to do everything we can, right? PBIS is the what do we do in between, but we still know that problem behaviors will happen. So one of the ways we sort of support staff is we say, just as we agreed on what our values are, let's agree on what the problem behaviors are. So we clearly define the problem and the context, right? You can wear your baseball hat lots of places, but maybe in my classroom I think it's not that appropriate. So I don't want you to wear hats in class, right? Well, one of the things we'll do is we'll actually pre-correct. If kids are going to go out onto the playground and we know that some of the playground equipment is really exciting or that we're having issues with a particular game, we might pre-correct for how to share, how to wait, how to, you know, be a good sport about things. So we're going to pre-click before they go into the setting to say, hey, can someone tell me one way we can be safe at recess today? We're really trying to get that consistency across all staff, right, all settings. But we're going to use those errors, those little minor problem behaviors as a teaching opportunity. How can we signal to a student, oh, that's not quite what we want, and then restate the value, the expectation we have, and give them a chance to practice it. So we're still taking that teaching, instructional kind of focus, even when we're responding to problem behavior. So a lot of times we will have our staff say, okay, let's list out the problem behaviors we think we are likely to see. What are the ones that are sort of most common for us? And then we come up with this thing, sometimes it gets called a T-chart, where we'll say, well, these are the behaviors that a teacher or an instructional assistant should be able to handle on their own. So we talk about those as classroom behaviors. They tend to be more minor. Then we're going to say sometimes we really need some additional support, or sometimes we really want to make it clear to the student this was sort of a big behavior. And so those ones we talk about as being office managed. That's when they go to see the principal, right, the administrator of the program or the school. So we have everyone agree, what behaviors will I manage on my own? What behaviors are going to go to the office? So again, we're going to take that instructional approach when we're managing them on our own. So we're going to signal that there was a problem. Oops, you're running in the hallway. Remember, we focus on being safe. That means that we walk when we're in the hallway. So we restate the correct response. Then I might say, can you show me how you walk down the hallway? So I'm going to let them practice the correct behavior. Then I'm going to acknowledge their walking. So we're not going to, like if I use a high five slip, I'm not going to have students run and then walk so that they can get the high five slip from me, but I can always thank them. I can always say, wow, I really appreciate how you listened and how, you're focusing on learning to do, the right thing, to be safe in the hallway. Now, when we talk about more severe behaviors, we kind of up our game a bit, and we want to say, let's track what's going on. One, we want to kind of know what are our strengths, what are our needs, but we also want to be able to pretty quickly identify students that may need additional support. So again, we have all the staff agree on what are the categories of behaviors, what's the general process, and then we have them work on a referral form that's going to give us some critical information that's going to help us with our decision making. So we work with schools to say, let's develop this pretty informative referral process. Right, so here's an example of a form, pretty quick and easy for a teacher to fill out, similar to that minor behavior slip, but it's sort of bigger. It has a little bit more information. It allows people to give a description of the intervention, and it actually then says what happens when they went to the office, because we want to make sure we have that communication, not just between school and home, but between office and classroom. So when a student comes back to the classroom, they know kind of what happened in the office. So this is a pretty common kind of standard-looking referral form for an elementary, a middle, or sort of high school. I know Naomi has some examples for H-PEP of a similar sort of thing looking at more preschool programs. So again, why? Well, we want the data for decision-making. We want the information. It's going to allow us to say, are we having a particular problem with the behavior? Or are we having a problem in a particular location, like the hallways or the bathroom or the cafeteria? So it's going to let us pinpoint where are our needs, where are we struggling. It will also let us know if we have a particular student that's having issues or a particular staff person who's struggling for some reason. So we use the data to sort of guide our ability to support our whole school. That begins with having the good data, that sort of good referral form that gives us the information that we need. So like I said, we can use the data to identify a possible problem, and we can use the data to become very precise about our problem. So instead of just saying, oh my gosh, cafeteria is out of control, recess is so unsafe, we can actually look at recess and we can say, what are the particular problems that we're having? it allows us to take the data and not just say we have a problem, but it tells us specific things about what the problem is. So is it a particular behavior at recess? Is it a particular recess? Maybe it's a grade level, or maybe it's a particular student, or a group of students. So the data allows us to be really specific and to be pretty informed about what do we need to do, what do we need to reteach. So again, like I said, and once we understand the problem, it lets us choose a better intervention. It also lets us say, did we actually do what we said we were going to do, what we agreed to do as the adult, and did it work? Did it make a difference for us? So we use a lot of data in PBIS because it's information, right? Because it helps us be more successful. Top 10 reasons that PBIS doesn't work. One is that we don't have strong administrator support. Another is that the staff don't really understand that they're the ones that set the culture in the school. They're the ones that can really impact the climate to set the tone, whether it's positive or negative. Or that people kind of give it lip service and they go, oh, yeah, that sounds nice, but they're not really committed to making a difference. So we need them to really step up and say, yes, we believe it, and we're going to help out. Another is that there's that lack of understanding about the connection between academics and social behavior. Right? We think that we can teach over problem behavior, or that we can't teach until students are sitting quietly. And we need to understand that they're connected, that we have to support both of those at the same time. Another is not taking it on as a process, using a team, making sure you have parent and student voice. It's something that the administrator says, just go do it, right? Or like one person in the school gets super, super excited, and so they do it all. Really, for it to be a true climate change, everybody has to be involved. This one, number 6, may sound funny, but we say don't take on too much too fast. We want it to be successful, and we're not in it for the quick. We're in it for 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So as Nui said, we talked about this yesterday, it's working smarter, not harder. Doing less, but doing that less better. Part of it, like we've been talking about, is that supporting staff. So we want to make sure that instead of inconsistency, we have consistency. And that ties back into the staff buy-in. Also sort of changing our view from traditional discipline to a more positive discipline, where instead of looking for the problem behavior and what do we do when it happens, that we're focusing on the what do we do in between. Right? We're focusing on the positives. We're taking an instructional approach when we respond to problem behavior. Or we say, yeah, that's great, but those 80-90% of our students are doing well. They can wait. I really want to focus on the 1 to 5%. And what we know is that that doesn't work. That's kind of what we've been doing all the time, right? If I can just take care of Jason, if I just don't have him in class anymore, everything will be fine. But we know that that's not true. So we need to sort of build that climate to support all students, excuse me, including Jason. Or we get so caught up that we forget to take the data. It's usually not very much fun. There's not a lot of people like me who usually get excited about the data, but we need to remember that it's going to keep us humble, it's going to hold us honest, and it's going to give us the information so that we make better choices, so that we're actually not only more effective, but we're actually more efficient. Thankfully, PBIS has been around for quite a long time. It actually started in 1988 in Oregon. I was just looking at one of the websites, the PBIS apps website there, and I think it said something that it's being implemented in 23,000 schools right now. There's tons of resources that are out there. The PBISnetwork.org, PBIS.org, the national one, or the PBIS apps, which is more on the data kind of piece. And there's one that's not on here, which is called PBIS World, which has some really good stuff as well. So what's kind of cool if a school or a program is interested, they can just get online and kind of do it themselves. But it's pretty easy to find information about it. Thank you, Naomi. I see you put the PBISworld.com. So today I know we're going to sort of continue on and talk about what's the positive side, that acknowledgement side. So what are some of the challenges to focusing on positives, either in your personal life or your work setting? And then maybe we can talk some about providing reinforcement for the positive.